Good morning and welcome to lesson 9.4. Today we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations by using three methods: the square root property, factoring, and zippering. Actually just two methods. But I wanted to make sure that I took the time. For those of you that have my notes, this is included in the last page. In the last page of 9.4, it's a typewritten page. Unfortunately, it didn't get scanned in. So let's just make sure we go over it. You are responsible for it. There's 6 methods to solve quadratic equations. Would be graphing. Graphing is great if you want a picture. You want to look at something. However, when we're graphing, it's not always the most accurate because we can make a mistake. Number one, the pencil point that we're using, and if we're using graph paper, there's just a lot of error that's introduced. A graphing calculator is great, but we're not allowed to use them in Algebra 1. Square root property I will talk to you about today. Of course, factoring, we spent so much time on factoring in Chapter 8, and then using the zero product property rule. Completing the square, and then, of course, my favorite, which will become yours as well, the quadratic formula. Okay, factoring and the square root method are the easiest and quickest, but you can't always factor every quadratic equation, and you can't always use the square root on every single equation. So which two work every time? The quadratic formula. I think I mentioned earlier that the quadratic formula always works, but it's really long and tedious. So that would be my last resort. However, it is the most accurate. And then, of course, completing the square always works, but you'll like that a lot better when you are in Algebra 2. All right? So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to do one of each type of examples here this morning. So we're following along in our notes, and we're looking at solving quadratic equations by factoring. Using the square root property, you may be able to use the square root property to solve certain equations. The repeated factor gives you just one solution. So let's just take a look at something like solve each equation, and we're going to always check our solution. Now we need to remember that when we're dealing with radicals, so we're going to carry over everything we learned last week when we're simplifying radicals, that we're not just going to plug it in as the square root of 20 and type that into our calculator and get a number and round it to 2 decimal places. But we're going to provide the most accurate answer. So let's go ahead and just do this problem for you. Square root property. If x to the second power equals n, then x would equal plus and minus the square root of n. Because remember in algebra, whatever we do to one side of the equation, we must also do to the other side. So my original equation here is x squared equals 20. To solve for x, we must take the square root of each side. So we're going to take the square root of x squared and the square root of 20. And what we get is x equals, and we're going to prime factor this, correct? Are y'all with me? And x is going to equal plus and minus 2 radical 5. Does anybody have a question? Make sure that when you simplify the square root of 20, that you also include the plus and minus into that. Take the plus and minus into account. Does anyone have a question? Pretty simple, straightforward, yes? Okay, let's give you guys one to try. D squared equals 8. D squared equals 8. You can take the square root of each side. Make sure you simplify it. Okay, when you get an answer, check with a friend. This is pretty simple and straightforward. Anybody want to share an answer? What did you get? Yes. D equals 2 radical 2. Can we correct it a little? D equals plus or minus 2 radical 2. Make sure you get the plus and the minus in there or you're going to lose half credit. Okay? Are you with me? Yes? Let's look at a really easy one here. A really easy one would be x squared equals 25. X squared equals 25. So what would I do to each side of the equation? Take the square root of each side. And what do I get for an answer? X equals plus and minus 5. Does anyone have a question? Yes?
What is the plus and minus for?
What is the plus and minus for? Do you agree that both 5 times 5 equals 25 and negative 5 times negative 5 equals 25? All right, here we go. Example number 2, this is also in your notes. Example number 2, it's on page 23, I believe, in your notes, 9.4. It says a minus 5 quantity squared equals 64. That's my original equation. So what we are going to do, here are your steps written out for you. You're going to take the square root of each side. So we take the square root of a minus 5 quantity squared equals plus and minus the square root of 64. Are you with me?
Yes.
And I should get a minus 5 equals plus and minus 8. Now look at what I wrote you a note. To solve for a, we need to write and solve 2 separate equations. Okay, we want to solve for a. We want a all by itself, so we're going to add 5 to each side. So what we have is a equals 5 plus and minus 8, which now becomes a equals 5 plus 8, and a equals 5 minus 8. So I have 2 answers here. One is what? 5 plus 8 is, and 5 minus 8 is. And these are 2 answers. These are your x-intercepts or your roots, and they would go into step builder notation. Question? Okay. The last thing I want to talk to you about today is solving a quadratic equation by factoring and or zippering. Factoring and or zippering. And I sincerely believe that this is what I hit hard on the test, because this is one that's used most often. Okay? So here we go. Let's take a look and let's get there. Let's go ahead and use the one in our notes. Let's go ahead and use the one in our notes. X squared plus 6x equals 7. So let me just give you a hint. Every single time it asks you to solve a quadratic equation, I would always see, can I factor it and zipper it first? Can I factor it and zipper it first? So the first thing you need to realize is this is the original equation. The second thing you need to realize is to solve a quadratic equation, one side must equal what? 0. So what I'm going to do in my next step is subtract 7 from each side. So this is going to become x squared plus 6x minus 7 equals 0. So now what I want to do is I want to use my very good friend, the x factor. So the question I would ask myself is, what multiplies to negative 7 but at the same time adds to 6? 7 and negative 1. Okay, so I'm going to stop you here and I'm going to put up a red flag. It's kind of like if you went to the beach and there's a red flag. You know that that means danger, correct? you know that means caution. Could be man of war, could be rough seas, could be sea lice. There could be a variety of reasons why they don't undertow, they don't want you swimming. So I'm going to put up a caution flag here, and I'm going to tell you that many of you are going to tell me that the solution is 7 and -1. And that is an incorrect solution, because this is a two-step process. The first step is to factor. The second step is to zipper. So I can make your life easy and say this. Whatever the numbers are when you X factor in the side, your solution is the opposite of that. So my solution would not be 7 -1, but my solution would be -7 +1. Let me prove it to you. I know you know how to zipper, but let me take a minute. X plus 7 times x minus 1 equals 0. Take each factor, set it equal to 0, and solve it like you were solving two mini equations. Your answer goes in set builder notation. No, for the bazillionth time this year, when you write two numbers in set builder notation, the order does not matter. Yes? Okay. Are you all with me? Yes? Okay. How about if you try one? You ready? M squared plus 10m plus 9 equals 0. M squared plus 10m plus 9 equals 0. It's kind of nice. One side already equals 0, so you can go right into your little X factor. Okay, what did you guys get for an answer? Anybody? Hello? What did you get? -9, -1, or -1, -9. Does anyone have a question? Okay, that concludes our lesson for today. Thank you for joining us. You can watch this or hear it on YouTube later today.